Welcome everyone to our free Mercury Retrograde webinar. We are looking at Mercury turning retrograde from September 17th through October 9th of 2015. Mercury's going to go retrograde at about 16 degrees Libra and stationary direct at 1 degree Libra. More on its 2-month passage through Libra after I get past a few housekeeping slides. Thank you very much for letting me go over this information. Here at the Evolutionary Astrology Network, you can study with us in 3 different ways. We have our free weekly audio podcasts that myself and Leroy do every week. We have our Astro Library by subscription, and of course our multimedia course segments. Here's more information on our Astro Library. This contains over a dozen years worth of materials by myself and other evolutionary astrologers through various conferences, workshops, etc. This information is divided up into 3 different sections in our Astro Library. You can see the 3 areas on your screen. You can subscribe for 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, or you can do a monthly recurring on one of these sections that you can cancel at any time. You can also do this for all 3 sections of the Astro Library as well. If you are new to evolutionary astrology and you're wanting to dip your toes into the water, stay tuned. I have a discount coming up for you. Here's our multimedia course. We have 3 different segments that you can receive materials for. As you look at this screen, you see listed there all of the DVDs and binders of materials that you can receive through the mail. We also offer separate certification in segments 1 and 2. We also, this year, have put segments 1 and 2 completely online now. For those of you that don't want to have to worry about any physical materials and you'd like to be able to just study from your internet-friendly device, again, both of these segments are now completely online. You can also get segments 1 and 2 online and the materials as backup if you want all of the above. You can check out our website for more information. Basically though, we have been running a little fall special in which you can have 25% off anything in your shopping cart. This is a one-time shopping situation. And you choose your items, and then at the end you apply the coupon code Libra at checkout, and it'll take the 25% off whatever you have put in your shopping cart. Now this is good up to Mercury retrograde, as you can see on your screen, which is good through Thursday, September 17th. All right, everyone, here is our subject matter again, Mercury retrograde in Libra, September 17th through October 9th of 2015. First of all, what are planetary retrogrades? From the perspective of evolutionary astrology, we look at the principle of psychological compensation as being out of sync with your own true nature. Now, almost all of us, regardless of evolutionary state, consensus, individuating, spirituating, almost all of us will have some degree of psychological compensations in order to appear normal or get along with somebody else. And these psychological compensations can take place anywhere there is dissatisfaction. Most simple example, you decide to go to a metaphysical conference or workshop and you're a carnivore and all of the food there is vegetarian or vegan and you're like, where's my meat? I don't want to stick out. So, okay, I'm going to be vegetarian for the weekend or through the event. So it can be very simple when we have these psychological compensations, all the way to some extremes, for instance, as we'll look at with Libra, where we're compensating on who we really are in relationships in order to get along with everybody else. And so how we start to observe this, and EA is always based upon observe and correlate, we look to the status quo. And that's going to give us the clues of where we compensate. Any planetary archetype can have compensation. And you look to the sign and house and all the aspects of that archetype. You can look at it via the evolutionary state of the soul, what level of expansion of consciousness we are at. And you can also look at the environmental conditionings that any soul came through with on their earth experience. That's all going to give us clues to the status quo and where we are going to do our compensations of who we really are. Now, planetary retrogrades, Mercury through Pluto, is what offer us opportunity to really break free from conditionings and compensations and align ourselves with who we truly are according to our own individual nature. Planetary retrogrades are also a geocentric or earth-centered phenomena. It's the apparent motion of the planets going around us. We live in a heliocentric universe. Everything revolves around the sun. But here on planet Earth, geocentric, it'll look like these planets will slow down, go backwards for a while before they stop and go forward again. Whenever we have one of these planetary retrogrades, it's always more powerful because a retrograde planet is always closest to Earth at the time of its retrograde. And these planetary retrogrades cause us to withdraw again from that status quo of our world to redefine that planetary archetype according to our own individual nature and natural law. So a retrograde planet is always non-static. It's throwing off, it's reviewing, it's re-evaluating, it's all the retrograde words. It's always in a perpetual state of evolving as it throws off the old archetypes. Now the sign and house of a planetary retrograde is going to define how it manifests in your world. And the opposite sign and house, in other words, where the retrograde planet is pointing towards by polarity, is going to provide the clarity and expression. And whenever we have a retrograde planet, answers are always going to come from within ourselves. Little astronomy on Mercury. It only takes 88 days to go around the sun. But because it has 3 to 4 retrograde cycles per year, it appears to have an annual cycle around the sun, just like planet Earth. The average retrograde period is 20 to 24 days, and when Mercury stands still to turn retrograde or direct, its stationary period is 1 day, and its elongation will never be beyond 29 degrees. In other words, as Mercury goes around the sun and as Earth goes around the sun, Mercury will never appear further than 29 degrees from our view on planet Earth. This is why, whatever your sun sign is, Mercury will always be in the sign before, the same sign, or the sign after, because those 30-degree signs, Mercury can never get beyond the sign before or the sign after. Here's a visual. If we would study Mercury retrograde in the nighttime skies, this is true of all the planetary retrogrades, both inner Mercury and Venus and the outer planets. If we would look at their passage in the nighttime sky, we'd see the planet moving along. And when we get to the point where it's going to turn direct, we enter the shadow of that planet. This is its first passage through so many degrees in our chart. Here's where it turns stationary retrograde. Here is the actual retrograde motion going backwards the second time over that set of degrees until it goes direct. And this is the post shadow where it makes the third passage over those same degrees until it reaches the point where it went stationary retrograde and then moves beyond. So visually, can you see 3 chances to get it right? 3 strikes, you're out. That phenomena of 3 we use in our world. You see how we can visit the area of our life the planet's going to work with. Visit the area of our life the planet's going to work with. Throw off all the old and work to incorporate the new, moving forward and evolving. The natural phenomena of planetary retrogrades and throwing things off to find essence of who we are via whatever planet we're working with on its retrograde cycle. When we are working with Mercury retrogrades, there's some patterns that start to develop. When you learn the 4 elements, fire, earth, air, water, Mercury retrogrades reversing through these elements. Retrogrades in water, then air signs, then earth signs, then fire signs. We'll have approximately 3 Mercury retrogrades in one element before it then moves into transitioning from one element to the next. For instance, 2015, the retrograde cycles are in air. Mercury's retrograde 6 months of this year. You can see the communications that have all been stirred up in 2015 just through Mercury retrogrades in Aquarius, Gemini, and now Libra. Next year, the retrograde cycles are going to be from the air element to earth, finishing up 2016 in the earth element. And then in 2017, retrograde cycles in earth, and then it's going to start transitioning from earth to fire. Again, reversing through the elements. Used to be in the last few years that these Mercury retrograde cycles lined up with the calendar year pretty good. Now they're shifting to where each calendar year will change these elements. However, this is still true. Approximately 3 retrogrades in one element, 3 retrogrades transitioning from that element to the next one, and then 3 in the next element. This is just a little clue as you study those Mercury retrograde patterns to just note, are they in air, which has been emphasizing all the communications. Now we're going to start moving into the earth element, and Mercury retrogrades are going to start being consumed with resources, throwing them off and moving into new resources. Mercury at this point rules 2 archetypes in the zodiac. Outer Mercury is Gemini in the 3rd house. Outer means it's the active polarity. Both Mercury rulerships are mutable, and in this one it's air. Both Mercury rulerships are archetypes of the conscious mind or the left brain. Here, when we look at Mercury with Gemini in the 3rd house, we are concerned with classifying the phenomenal world. We want words, labels, facts, figures. Many of you might be sitting on a chair. You might be looking at it through your electronic device as you watch this. You may have a pen and paper making notes. As I use these words, we all have a communication in which we understand. So Mercury's all forms of communications, though, whether we're speaking or writing or using our smartphones or computers and devices, because all of our electronica devices are used so much with communications, Mercury retrograde can cause a bit of chaos, the computer breakdown, the software that doesn't work, the smartphone that gets dropped and the screen breaks. It goes beyond just watch out for your vehicle and defensive driving with Mercury retrograde. This rulership, Gemini third house, keywords here, Mercury's debatable, clever, versatile. Here it's those twins, those Gemini twins. Mercury can be excitable and reactive, the trickster, adaptable, talkative, argumentative. This is where Mercury through Gemini in the third house is always wanting to understand the relativity of truth. We all have our interpretation of truth. We have a personal truth and we have universal timeless truth. Here, Mercury is always wanting to expose weak links. The inner side of Mercury is its rulership of Virgo in the sixth house. Inner is because it's passive polarity, still mutable modality, adapting all the time. Here, Mercury's concerned with earth, resources, the physical. Still conscious mind, left brain, but now Mercury learns to analyze, to self-reflect, to really adapt, to apply its reasoning capacities, to do that Virgo sixth house self-improvement. One of the most major distortions we run into with the Virgo sixth house archetype of Mercury is sadomasochism, which is guilt linked to either atonement, which is victimization in the masochist, or guilt linked to anger, which is victor and sadism. All this stems from your human-made conditionings, namely via religion, religious principles created by humans that have separated us from natural spiritual laws and principles, which are always observable in nature and timeless, universal. When we get caught into this side of Mercury with its distortions, we get caught up into all that inner outer criticism, criticizing ourselves, criticizing others, others coming back to us with criticism. Can you see how this sets in? Nerves, worry, anxiety, self-doubt, procrastination, all of those good old words we run into with Virgo sixth house. In essence here, what Mercury is learning to do is learn how to be of service to another one-on-one, and in ever-increasing expansions, Libra through Pisces, learning how to be of service through another. We're leaving behind the egocentrism of Leo, Aries through Leo, and we're transitioning into the Libra through Pisces archetype. More on this with Mercury retrograde, specifically in Libra. Here's some of the dates for you. Last Mercury conjunction when it was on the other side of the sun, the superior exterior conjunction that we had. Here's where Mercury entered its shadow at approximately 1 degree Libra first time. Here is its pre-shadow passage, retrograde, September 17th, 1555 Libra. Highlight of the Mercury retrograde, highlight of all planetary retrogrades is either when they have a conjunction, Mercury-Venus, or opposition, Mars through Pluto, to the Sun. And you can see here it will occur September 30th, 7 degrees Libra. Mercury direct October 9th, 1 degree Libra. Mercury in post-shadow until October 24th, when it finally moves past 16 degrees Libra, and eventually Mercury will have another exterior conjunction to the Sun, November 17th at 25 degrees Scorpio. Mercury, however, is going to be in Libra for an entire 2 months, from August 27th through November 1st, 2nd, 2015, depending on where you live on planet Earth. So, all of the Mercury in Libra, communication issues that are going to be brought up through its retrograde cycle. We basically have 2 months of Mercury in Libra. Typically, when it's going direct, it's only in a sign of the zodiac 2 weeks. It's in a retrograde sign or 2 signs 10 times longer. Yeah, you see my little sign up here, or my little quote. The best person to talk to about the problems in your relationship, or relationships plural, is the person or people you're in relationship with. Yes, Libra will include intimate relationships, but Libra is square Cancer and Capricorn. So it also brings in the family and work in those various relationships that we have for karma reasons, for compare and contrast reasons. To go over to the Libra polarity Aries, who am I in the midst of all these relationships that are taking place in my life? And Mercury retrograde in Libra is going to emphasize, who am I and how do I stand up for myself in all of the relationship scenarios that are being exposed this fall throughout September and October with Mercury retrograde. I had to include this one. Here's some of those Libra communication distortions. And yes, they're from the female point of view, so please allow me to put up the patriarchal distortions joke. As you can see here on your screen, 5 deadly terms used by a woman. I won't go over them all, but she says fine. Translation, this is the word women use to end an argument when she knows she is right and you need to shut up. Go ahead. This is a dare, not permission. Do not do it. You can see the joke here. You can see the distortions in communications. And this is one of the things that we really have to work through when Mercury's in Libra and when Mercury is retrograde in Libra. Did I really hear what I think you said? Let me paraphrase it back to you. Is this what you meant? If not, please say it again until I understand what you said. And this goes back and forth between both parties in whatever way any relationship is having miscommunications. Now, Mercury retrograde in general, we have to release excess thought. The conscious mind is saturated. It's hard to process information and ideas in our life. We've reached a point where we have to review and release any worn out mental patterns. We have to quiet the mind. Mercury retrograde is always left brain pointing to right brain, regardless of the sign the retrograde is taking place in, regardless of the house personally the retrograde is taking place in. Mercury as ruler of Gemini points to Sagittarius and its ruler Jupiter, right brain, intuition, conscious beliefs. Mercury as ruler of Virgo points to Pisces and its ruler Neptune, which is our beliefs on the deepest unconscious levels, and in EA as totality of consciousness in all its many forms and manifestations. We know it as universal source, God, Goddess, Great Spirit, whatever you want to call it. So anytime Mercury's retrograde, the mutable quadrant is activated. And the mutable quadrant or modality is adaptable, changing, moving, evolving, letting go and releasing. So Mercury retrograde, any sign, any house, is turning inward and quieting the mind. It's learning to think for oneself. And it is learning to trust intuition first, logics and facts second. So again, Mercury retrograde, finding quiet time in the busyness of retrograde overload. And Mercury will create a retrograde overload better than any other planetary archetype. Depending on the sign Mars retrograde is in, sometimes Mars puts a match up with Mercury into to-do and busyness category. But Mercury retrogrades just increase the busyness. Can you see how counterproductive it is to quiet time, to going inward? Can you see how you must make the conscious effort when Mercury's retrograde? Mercury retrograde will also mean multiple communications until clarity is achieved. See the emphasis with Mercury retrograde in Libra, which is the psychology of listening from EA's perspective? Of course, as we were noting before with the busyness, it's the details, details, details. Paying attention to that electronic technological world, doing things more than once in order to integrate, evolve, release. I don't need to do this one anymore. Mercury retrograde. And sometimes taking the time to do it correctly rather than procrastinate or I'll do it tomorrow. Mercury retrograde is a time period to go in and clean out that filing cabinet and organize your paperwork. It is the time to review and edit writing. It is the time to get an astrological reading, even if you find yourself rescheduling it once or twice on both the astrologer and the client end. It's just natural. I've been experiencing Mercury retrogrades for 30 plus years now in my astrological world. And as I start moving into the shadow, go through the retrograde, move through post shadow, I always just accept the fact that there's going to be a certain amount of my scheduling that I need to redo. As a matter of fact, I made an appointment last week. This is a past life regression session that I do hands-on, a deep memory processing with a client. And I woke up this morning going, uh-oh, forgot that detail. I'm going to have to reschedule this appointment on my end. I have clients forget Mercury retrograde. Again, it's just the busyness and making peace with those details more than once. This retrograde is going to be making peace with the communication details more than once. I find myself going into that mode with my husband and my son of, okay, pay attention when they're talking. Pay attention when they're talking. Okay, repeat back. Okay, did I hear what you said? Blah, blah. It is the best way that we gain clarity on which course of mental actions to take. Mental self-talk, mental outwardly communicating, and mentally following through with actions Mercury to Mars. When we have Mercury retrograde in Libra, all of those inner and outer communications are going to become emphasized. We must all have a willingness to discuss any issue multiple times, however many times it takes, even more than 3 times, pre-shadow, retrograde, post-shadow. However much communication it takes until we move through it. One of the things that Leroy and I always try to do in our world is what we call walk and talk. For those of you who are new to us, we have 2 basically spiritual businesses that we're self-employed to. We are co-workers, co-partners. We live together, sleep together, eat together, work together. Blah, 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 blah. Can you see how we can get so caught up in the Mercury details of life? So we try to sometimes just step outside the house. We work out of the home and go take a walk around the neighborhood, and it's our walk and talk. It allows us to just kind of back up from the detail load, take that larger picture and communicate, and have the breakthroughs in communications to cover some details that we weren't listening with the other. Long ago, when we first got in relationship, we created the phrase, "you betcha." And over the years, when one of us says, "you betcha," it means I didn't hear a word you were saying, or I physically couldn't hear you. You were talking around the corner, your back's turned to me, or I really didn't understand what you were saying. And so over the years, when one of us says, "you betcha," we know, code word, all right, I got to make an effort to communicate this more clearly in a variety of ways. This is Mercury retrograde in Libra. Again, as I had said, in the world of evolutionary astrology, Libra is the outer side of Venus. Taurus is the inner side of Venus, Venus ruling 2 signs. And Libra initiates the second half of the zodiac, as does the 7th house. And so this is where we have all of the, hopefully, interactions with another evolving towards equality of giving and receiving. And one of the distortions of Libra is projecting onto the other what I want to give them in order to be given back to. And so it brings up what we call that psychology of listening. Being able to actually hear another and to hear their reality as it exists for them, regardless of whether it's the intimate one-on-one partner, or it's family, or it's coworkers, or it is the clerk at the post office. And Mercury retrograde in Libra is going to emphasize the ability to listen, as well as Aries polarity, the ability to speak up and be heard. It will also include hearing our own inner voice and truth. Remember Mercury throwing off all excess thought and mental patterns, quieting down on an inner level. And what is the inner voice that is coming up from within us just by nature of Mercury retrograde? Can we hear what our own voice is saying to us? Self-talk. Walk in nature, anybody? Meditation, yoga, tai chi? Mercury retrograde is where we will always learn new communication skills in general. And in Libra, it's going to emphasize that. It's going to emphasize the practice of communicating in non-defensive modes, Aries polarity, non-dominating modes, Libra. What are the words? How is my voice? What are the inflections? What are the choices I'm going to make in communications? What are the new ways of communicating I'm going to try out in order to be heard, understood, and reach new levels of communicating more clearly with someone else? Typical Libra fashion. Mercury retrograde in Libra is going to have relationship beginnings and endings taking place. Won't be for everybody, but it will be for some of us. If they are new relationships coming in, Mercury retrograde, we have to have a little bit of that Libran discernment over jumping in. Mercury retrograde in Libra is going to just feel that communication excitement with someone else. And in natural law, the order of moving into relationship is companionship first, Do our beliefs and values over mutual activities share common ground? Does it lead us into friendship? Finally, if we established a foundation of friendship, do we then have intimacy? And oh, by the way, Mercury retrograde in Libra, these new relationships coming in, do we have role equality? Or are we starting out dominating and being dominated? Might not last longer than the Mercury retrograde cycle if that's the case. If we're looking at relationship endings, one of the things to remember in general is hellos are only as good as goodbyes. In other words, if we've reached that natural or unnatural parting, can we do it as friends? Can we have exit communications? Here's what no longer works for me in the relationship. What no longer works for you? What do you think I need to do better in my next relationship, Mercury retrograde in Libra? Can you listen and really hear what that partner's saying as they're so frustrated and angry they're packing their bags and walking out the door? How many times when we end relationships do we not even have communications? Even if they're not verbal, try written. Can you be civil on Facebook? Can you make that effort to understand why it's ending? One of the typical things that happens with Libra is the love triangles, being attracted to somebody else and leaving the primary relationship. And the healthy thing is to recognize that whatever you're attracted to outside of a primary relationship is representative of what's missing in the primary relationship, and the effort needs to be to bring that into the primary relationship before moving on. That is the way to minimize the creation of karma. If partners unable or unwilling to bring that attraction in, then you're free to leave the primary relationship and move on. But so many times, especially with the Pluto in Libra generation, hello, goodbye, goodbye, hello, next. And we have no reflection on the patterns. So it becomes very important that we are doing this, especially for those who were born Pluto Libra between 1971-72 up into the mid-60s, where Mercury's going retrograde at 16 Libra. If you've got Mercury over your Pluto in Libra 3 times here over the next 2 months, this is you addressing on a deep soul level and having exposed on deep soul levels all of your relationship inequalities, your inabilities to listen, your projections and expectations onto the other, the need to have an evolution into relationships as equal partners, and Aries polarity, that ability to be yourself in a relationship rather than the karma chameleon, as I call the Pluto in Libras. Which one of my many roles should I take on in order for you to like me? Talk about a psychological compensation. When Pluto Libra can't stand in itself, on its own role as an individual, it sets up all these things that Mercury retrograde in Libra will bring along and emphasize. So Mercury retrograde in Libra, though, also has the potential for relationship evolution into greater equality. Again, we just may be addressing changes in our intimate relationships or friendships or career or familial structures. And so we're bringing up into consciousness what may no longer be working in any relationship. And we want to have a redefinition of whatever our roles are. In today's evolving world, the Betty Crocker Marlboro Man traditional female-male roles, as Jeffrey Green would teach them, just really don't belong in the modern world anymore. Goes back to the square of the Pluto in Cancers. And now as you look at it, many times the female is out of the home as well as the male. We need to have greater role equality on the chores in the house. Sometimes the male stays at home and is a stay-at-home dad while the female goes out and works. Wherever we are becoming aware of some type of role inequality in our life, this is what Mercury retrograde in Libra is wanting to redefine and evolve. And we're going to go to that polarity, Aries, self, and get a sense of who we are and what works for us and what doesn't work for us. And then it's going to go back over there to Libra and attempt to communicate and bring through changes in whatever ways. And one of the things it brings up with the archetype of Libra is, again, how we will have a tendency to project onto any partners or relationships what we expect, what we want to have met by that partner. And if Mercury retrograde in Libra were thrown back in upon ourselves, Aries polarity, is to recognize we need to meet those expectations ourselves and minimize the projections. Then partners in relationships are free to be in the relationship. Minimizing projections and expectations minimizes conditional love, I will love you if. It also brings about a greater potential for unconditional love, I will love you no matter what, even if you wish to move on without me. So we may find ourselves going through some disappointments with this Mercury retrograde and recognizing that some of these relationships, even friendships, are not meeting our needs. Can we communicate it, discuss it, evolve the relationship, or is the relationship over? We all have a responsibility to fulfill our own needs. Ultimate responsibility to fulfill all of our own needs. Now, again, because Libra has a square to Capricorn and Cancer, this Mercury retrograde will also bring up career issues and family issues in which something may need to be communicated, addressed, the good old inequalities of patterns. Perhaps the parent needs to release some parental roles and allow the adult child to now take over some things. There's almost a role reversal there that may or may not go over in a Libran smooth fashion. It may have some Aries polarity extremes to it. The parent may not want to relinquish authority or control to the adult child. Same thing with our children that are growing up through teenage years, young adulthood, whatever the case may be. Essentially, whether it is partners, friends, work co-workers, family, we've got to release old communicating patterns. And we've got to make an effort to really listen, to see how it's going to create a redefinition of ourself in order to move forward. Some of the distortions with Mercury retrograde in Libra, falling back into those extremes of polarization and even more inequality. The good old love affairs, dishonesty, any Mercury retrograde. Again, we can take it to extremes of inequalities We can be arguing instead of listening and communicating. We can have even more of those famous projections and expectations. We can even have over socializing at expense to honoring ourselves. You see a few of my little quotes down here. A relationship without trust is like a car without gas. You can stay in it all you want, but it won't go anywhere. Some of the Libra enmeshments, the biggest mistake I have made in my life is letting people stay in my life far longer than they deserve. It comes from the side of being dominated in relationship, or thinking you can love somebody enough to make it okay. The inequality in giving and receiving. Being single is smarter than being in the wrong relationship. Wrong, again, the role inequality. Someone having to dominate the other. Someone allowing themselves to be dominated by another person. All these types of things get pushed to the forefront with Mercury retrograde in Libra. And that polarity point pushes us over to me, myself, and I. When Mercury's retrograde in Libra, the polarity point is Aries. And so whatever house you find, or two houses you find Aries on, this is where you've got to maintain and evolve your sense of self-identity, to find a center of self that then allows you to ebb and flow through whatever these relationship changes are that are taking place in your world. It means that this Aries polarity, we have got to balance time alone with ourselves with socialization. We've got to honor that intuitive hit when we just need to get away and be alone. And we've got to honor that intuitive hit around loneliness and to go back and interact in the world. And every time we go out there, back and forth, we have to balance ourselves with others in more and more equal ways as best as we understand it. Libra energy has a tendency to be in extreme. It's not by nature balanced, and especially due to the patriarchal distortions. And so Libra balances ebb and flow. Self, others, self, others, self, others. Alone together, alone together, alone together. And it's ebbing back and forth that creates that balance of equality through experience of it. If we tend towards the enmeshment codependency side, this Mercury retrograde may throw us into an Aries polarity of being alone. If we tend to be a little bit on the self-focused, self-centered, or I can do it all by myself side, I'm going to tell you what to do. We may find this Mercury retrograde forces us into consideration of others. In other words, whatever side of the fence we fall on in our social roles with others, we have to release dominating and dominated roles. If we are on the controlling, dominating side, we are going to have to learn how to give to others, honor authority, share authority. If we fall onto the side of allowing others to run us over and dominate us, we're going to be pushed into standing up for ourselves in some way. This Aries polarity is going to require that we learn to think and speak for ourselves through all the communications taking place, Mercury retrograde in Libra. It's also going to require us to have an ability to self-initiate our own actions that we perceive to be highest and best for us. Here is, I forgot Donald Trump's chart. Astrologers have been tossing his chart around recently. Probably the thing that sticks out the most for the tape, Donald Trump, June 14th, 1946, 10:54 a.m., Queens, New York. Rising 29 Leo 55. Talk about that Leo mane of hair. You notice how Saturn has been down in the 4th house here, tail end of Scorpio, getting ready. It's been squaring this ascendant 3 times. Here he is coming from the bottom, the dark horse, and having his moment of fame. I think as Saturn moves into Sagittarius again, September 17th, the day after the next Republican presidential debates in the U.S., as Saturn moves into Sag and goes for the truth versus lies exposures, there may be some interesting things that we see taking place here with Donald Trump. I got a attraction repulsion going on with him. Part of me likes the ability that he's not beholden to any of the billionaire candidates, supposedly a billionaire himself. He can say whatever he wants. The other part of me is deeply offended at some of the crap that comes out of his mouth. Now, here's the Mercury retrograde from 16 to 1 degree Libra. It's going to go retrograde 1.5 degrees from his Jupiter. It's going to go over his Chiron 3 times. It's going to go over Mercury 3 times. It's going to first quarter square his Mercury in Cancer 3 times. And it's going to sextile his 12th house Pluto 3 times. I just feel that there will probably be a lot more about Donald Trump's communications exposed. If you look here, 12th house Pluto, Pisces soul. Is he in touch with reality? South node, Sag, 4th house, conjunct the moon. North node, Sun, Uranus, Gemini conjunction. There's a lot of truth versus lies here that go on. I think we have someone who is very shifty in his beliefs and his opinions, and he does whatever is expedient in the moment to gather the resources. Could be some emotional sensitivities here, but I got the feeling this is consensus world, Cancer, 11th house, and this is where all of the gender insults have come from. But bottom line is, I don't really think we have a diplomat here. And look for this to be exposed more and more throughout this Mercury retrograde cycle. Look for all of the other Republican candidates right here to confront him in a variety of different ways. It may or may not create some self-reflection here. I definitely put Donald Trump in that 3rd stage consensus with EA, evolutionary states of consciousness, and there isn't a lot of self-reflection when that goes on. There has to be a willingness to do this in the consensus world. It may be forced upon him in some way. By the way, any comments or questions, you have your Q&A board up there. Leroy runs that board. He runs the questions back and forth. And if he needs my input, he's always welcome to interrupt me. I'll try and get through my material and see if I can take any general questions. But if there's anything germane to my slides that I'm not covering, please feel free to shoot your question to Leroy, and he'll either open you up if you're mic'd. Webinars always need a USB headset or a good iPhone's earbud headset to your internet-friendly device in order to have your voice come through clearly. Mercury retrograde aspects. Astrology tends to miss the fact that Mercury moves so fast it is always active or aspecting several planets during its retrograde cycles. Evolutionary astrology utilizes the 360-degree cycle of the 8 phases and many aspects to recognize how active Mercury really is during any retrograde cycle. Did I hear you, Leroy? Yes?
Yeah, I might have missed a hand raised here. Let's go ahead and open up the board for Vanessa's question. Vanessa, are you there? You had your hand raised on the board, but no question, so we'll go ahead.
No, I had to find the unmute button. I'm talking and no one's hearing me. Sorry, found it. Okay. That's Mercury retrograde. So my question is this, just if you have time to do this. So let's say, I'm just theoretically, if somebody's Mercury is in Aries and you're getting this retrograde in Libra and it hits it pretty much exactly as it stations direct to go forward again, so the Mercury's at 0, or the Mercury could be at the place where it stations retrograde, either of those two endpoints. I was just wondering, is there going to be an impact on that Mercury, that natal Mercury that's in the Aries opposition to this? And is there a difference between if it were at the station or station direct or at the station retrograde?
Okay, there's multiple questions there. I'll do my best to answer them. Okay, honey?
Sure, and you can mute me again.
Sure, sure. First of all, Mercury retrograde aspecting any planet is going to intensify the communications with that planetary archetype. In this specific example, Mercury opposing natal Mercury, it's going to emphasize all of the communications and being willing to listen and speak between the native who has Mercury opposed Mercury and whoever they are communicating with in any type of relationship. All that's going to be emphasized. Just like Mercury in Cancer would have the squares to Mercury in Libra. Mercury in Cancer would have first quarter squares with Mercury retrograde in Libra, crises in action to speak out. Mercury in Capricorn would have Mercury retrograde in Libra making last quarter squares, and that's going to emphasize an ability to listen and reflect. So there are so many possible Mercury communication issues with every planet in your chart that, it's not, we don't have the time here to go into them in detail. Just remember in general, when Mercury retrograde is going to aspect a natal planet, that planetary archetype must learn to communicate. Mars has to learn to communicate its actions. Jupiter has to communicate its beliefs and its ability to recognize what Mercury is wanting to review. Saturn's going to have to communicate self-responsibility. And then you can bring in the specific aspects with all of that as you are looking at the specific planetary aspects. Mercury aspecting a planet stationary retrograde is going to emphasize the stationary retrograde planet really throwing off whatever archetypes with that planet do not work. If you were born with Mars stationary retrograde, you've really got to review and think through actions, and it's emphasized with Mercury retrograde before you take action. If you're born with a planet that is stationary direct, and Mercury retrograde is aspecting that, there's still review, but it's not as intense as stationary retrograde. Again, that's a lot of information. Beginners might need to listen to this again or visit some of our introductory materials to really get a grip on what I'm talking about. For anybody who is rather new listening to this subject, again, evolutionary astrology works with the 360 cycle of phases and aspects. There are 4 squares. There are 2 oppositions. There's the gibbous building opposition. There is the full phase releasing opposition. And we really work with where any 2 planets are in that building, waxing, or releasing, waning side of the cycle of phases and aspects. As a matter of fact, here's the screen. No time to go over this, but here's the screen that goes from 0 to 360. Excuse me, looking at the 8 phases and all the aspects within the 8 phases. And this is why with Mercury, using some of these lesser known aspects, especially semi-squares and sesquisquadrates, they are just as important as squares, oppositions, conjunctions in the world of aspects. And more traditional astrology is starting to bring that out. For instance, we're all recognizing that if we put Pluto here at 15 degrees Capricorn and go all the way around to 30 degrees Scorpio, 1 degree Sag, Saturn is making 3 waning semi-squares to Pluto before it has a conjunction to Pluto in 2020. So Saturn's relationship to Pluto has now entered balsamic phase with Pluto. And not to go into any more details, any 2 planets in your natal chart are in a phasal relationship with each other. Any 2 planets in the sky are in a phasal relationship with each other. They may or may not include specific aspects. But this is the key to taking the confusion out of interpretation of aspects. More details, the introductory workshop at EAN, which you can do 2 hours at a time, or as I said, we've got our
new learning paths page.
Yes.
The new learning paths page would have a lot of information. We've kind of segmented into beginners, intermediate, and advanced. And a lot of this cycle of phases and aspects that Kim is referring to in this call is, of course, more intermediate and advanced material. However, we did a wonderful production down in Scottsdale, Arizona a few years back, and I think that's one of the featured product bundles there for intermediate. Maybe some people that have a little experience in astrology that want to learn more about cycle of phases and aspects would be a great opportunity for them to participate. So go to that Learning Paths page. You'll see it right on the home page with that colorful logo that we have there right on the banner on the home page, and for more information.
The banner of the dragon on top of the armorelli, I think. Not pronouncing that word quite correctly.
Armillary, yeah.
Armillary.
That's a tongue twister for Mercury retrograde.
Yeah, you're really cutting out, honey. But I gotcha. Armillary. So here's all the aspects that this Mercury retrograde cycle is making during this retrograde from September 17th to October 9th, more extended all the way through August, September, October. And each one of these aspects is 3 times, except there's only 2 Venus semi-squares. There's eventually 3, but they're far enough apart, I just included the 2. Mercury actually is building in aspects from Venus through Mars, and it has 2 semi-squares, semi-sextile semi-squares with both Venus and Mars, waxing semi-sextiles with Jupiter, waning semi-squares with Saturn, waning sextile with Saturn, 3 each, waning in conjunct to Neptune, and you see how I put the degrees here from 0 to 360. Oops, this is 180. That should be 270. This right here is 270. I did not catch this one when I did this. And Mercury also has 3 conjunctions to the North Node and oppositions to the South Node. I'm going to run through these aspects just as fast as I can. This is the second half of the Mercury retrograde. I also have a listing of all these aspects at the end of the slideshow in chronological date order. Here's the interior conjunction to the Sun, which is September 30th, 8:38 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time from Rapid City, where we are located at EAN physically. I always like to use a 0-degree Aries chart so that it's relevant for all of us and we get that natural zodiac of recognizing the aspects. When we have that interior conjunction going on, we're going to have Mercury Sun in aspect to a yod with the fast-moving moon. We're going to have a grand trine going on with Moon, Jupiter, Pluto. And we're also going to have the oppositions of Mars, Jupiter to Neptune. So we have quite a lot of activity through the Mercury retrogrades. This chart can almost be in a nutshell. Remember we said Mercury has waxing sextiles to Jupiter, 30 degrees beyond Jupiter. Mercury ranges from 30 to 45 degrees beyond Venus and Mars. Mercury ranges from 45 to 60 degrees from Saturn. Mercury has the last quarter squares to Pluto, and it has the waning inconjuncts to Neptune, and of course it has the conjunctions to the North Node, oppositions to the South Node. Astrologically, Mercury's always in aspect to Venus during retrograde cycles. Conscious mind in our value system. You see the dates, anything in red is always highlighting the Mercury when Mercury is retrograde making the aspect. So Mercury starts out 30 degrees from Venus, gets 45 degrees, turns retrograde, goes back to 30 degrees with Venus as it turns direct and then moves forward again. When Mercury's ahead of Venus, we can be racing ahead with ideas, thoughts, communications without considering what it all means to us. So Mercury retrograde to Venus, back up what's important, and that's what you want to make the effort to communicate with. Because we had a Venus retrograde in Leo in 2015, Venus was retrograde from what? 0 degrees Virgo to 14 Leo. We're going to have an emphasis here on intimate love, Venus and Leo, giving and receiving as each person needs versus, remember, those projections. We have to be careful with the game playing, the love affairs, the honesty versus dishonesty. We're either going to go into those distortions of the quote-unquote negatives, or we are going to learn how to really be honest. We all want to be loved. We all want to be seen, to be noticed. Can we make those communication efforts on how best to do it with whomever we may be relating to, regardless of the type of relationship? Mercury does the same thing with Mars this time. It goes from 30 degrees ahead of Mars to 45 degrees. Then it turns retrograde and makes another waxing semi-square, new phase to crescent phase. And it has the retrograde semi-sextile 30 degrees before they turn direct, 30 degrees again, 40 degrees, and all the inner planets are in the process of moving beyond Mars to all having oppositions with Mars when it has its retrograde next April, May in Sag, Scorpio. So we had the conjunctions with Mars this year. We'll have the inner planets, Sun, Mercury, Venus making oppositions to Sun, Mercury, Venus making oppositions to Mars next year. So here's reviewing these actions around love, around giving and receiving as each person needs versus projections. And again, just like with Venus, the distortions, we have to look over these domination games, who's most important, the love affairs, the game playing. You know, here's Mars mainly during this retrograde cycle in Leo versus Virgo. So who's going to do all of the risk-taking, attention-getting games versus Mars in Leo? How do I love myself better? How do I really communicate who I essentially am in relationships with whoever I'm relating to? And can I give someone else that same attention? Can I listen before I speak? Can I hear what someone else has to say before I act? Of course, you notice my little sign there. Don't worry when I fight with you. Worry when I stop, because it means there's nothing left for us to fight for. A little play on Mercury, Mars, because these two could get into some good arguments over how both archetypes want to evolve any relationship intimacy, over any relating patterns with somebody. You know, there could just be power struggles going on at work with a coworker, and both want to be heard. And how well can each listen? Do we have to call in the third party supervising? Can the owner listen to the suggestions from the employee who is in the trenches doing all the work and might have a better way? You know, again, Mercury is ahead of Venus, Mars. So as it goes retrograde in Libra, it has ideas on how it wants relationships to evolve and change. But the retrograde, I got to go back, clarify with myself, Aries polarity, and then discuss it, communicate it, figure out how anybody I'm relating to, we're going to move forward. Mercury's doing the same thing with Jupiter. Here it's just the semi-sextile 30 degrees 3 times. It's still going to be consideration of others in communications, learning how to listen deeply, psychologically. Mercury left brain, Jupiter right brain. They've come off a conjunction. I don't remember whether it was probably late Leo, looking at the degrees of the 30 degree moving behind. So they've come off of that intuitive spark through Jupiter's passage in Leo. But now with Jupiter in Virgo, it's going to really emphasize consideration of the other and listening. And the 30 degrees is going to spark a lot of new communication efforts. Remember, evolving that psychology of communicating, psychology of listening, the new communication skills that we want to make an effort with. So we've got to do the inner listening. We've got to find new self-talk patterns that we're going to test out with others in our world. We have to learn how to be of service to another and to society through Jupiter's year-long passage in Virgo. Now, if any of you haven't noticed the detail increase, Jupiter in Virgo August 11th through September 6th, 16th, 2016, something like that. But Jupiter in Virgo August 11th, which by the way, I have a 2-hour workshop on Jupiter's year-long transit through Virgo. If any of you are interested in that, It can feel just like when Jupiter was in Gemini, it felt like a year-long Mercury retrograde. Jupiter's in Virgo. It can feel like a year-long Mercury retrograde. It can feel like a year-long. Pay attention to the details. And I kind of went, okay, I'm going to make peace with this. I started a lot of house cleaning projects last winter. Didn't do much over the summer. Now as winter comes in, Jupiter Virgo, I'm going to finish those house cleaning projects this fall. Leroy's raising his eyebrows, throwing his eyes up in the air, but he married a Pluto and Virgo wife, so she likes Jupiter and Virgo. I'm like digging in to what are the things that I can do? How can I self-improve me? How can I clean things up? Mercury is going to have all kinds of ideas of how the other person should be doing that. Can we take that in and put it to effect with ourselves? Can we learn how to be helpful to another? Distortions of this is going to be all talk, no effort, nobody walking their talk. It can be the inner-outer criticisms. It can be all of the procrastinations, Jupiter, Virgo. It can be the avoidance of communications here. I can't get in their face. I can't really tell them what I'm thinking. It'll lead to a huge shouting match. They might leave me. And instead, we're going to stew it over? Nah. Here's a heads up for you. The next Mercury retrograde cycle is going to come at the same time Jupiter goes retrograde in Virgo. Jupiter goes retrograde in Virgo. It's going to come the beginning of January. I got the dates for you at the end of this PowerPoint slideshow. So make a little bit of effort here, because the next Mercury retrograde is going to be in Capricorn. It'll be trines to Jupiter retrograde in Virgo. But you want to be making the effort here, because you're going to deal with it with the next Mercury retrograde if you don't. And it could have the tendency to affect your pocketbook or resources. Mercury retrograde Capricorn, Jupiter Virgo, the beginning of the first of the year. If you don't make the efforts of sparking these new communications and really learn how to listen and serve another in healthy, equal boundaries. I'm not asking you to self-sacrifice and be Florence Nightingale extremes. Mercury has those waning aspects to Saturn. It is 60 degrees from Saturn, gets to 45 degrees, turns retrograde, backs up, the waning semi-square again, the waning sextile again, to then go forward, and Mercury will have a conjunction with Saturn here in Sag later this year. And so what we're doing here is we're going from last quarter phase with the sextile to balsamic phase with the 45 degree semi-square, or more correctly, the 315 degree semi-square. So when we're in that last 90 degrees of the 360 circle, it is taking broader and broader perspectives in. And so this is where Mercury to Saturn is going to have some real intuitive, honest listening and communicating. Saturn in Sag, truth, larger picture, truth versus lies. And so in many senses, see where we had the first two aspects in Scorpio? Now we're going to have the retrograde ones and the last two ones all in early Sag. We're going to have the potential ability to make sense of all of the Saturn and Scorpio upsets over the course of this summer as Saturn backed up into Scorpio June through September. We can also make sense of some of those Saturn and Scorpio upsets during the entire 2.5 years in Scorpio. Anybody in intimate relationships, who hasn't had intimate upsets with others sometimes intimate upsets with people who were not your marriage type partner or intimate partner. Who hasn't had the Scorpio upsets? How can we be communicating with people through this Mercury retrograde? How can we be listening to others about their upsets? How can they be listening to us about what happened in our world? How can we be taking this all in, and Mercury Saturn reaching deeper and deeper levels of self-responsibility and reaching deeper levels of ultimate understandings of what this all means. Last quarter balsamic phase, Mercury to Saturn. This is where we can have some deep conversations. At the semi-squares, they may not be easy, but Mercury has 6 aspects to Saturn, not 3. So it's going to require us to dig deep to get to the truth and to communicate as best we can. If we don't, we're going to run into, again, all those psychological compensations and perhaps outright dishonesty with people. I'm afraid to tell you what I really think. Or I'm literally not wanting to tell you what I think because I'm more interested in manipulating you. You can see that we can have just simple misunderstandings or compensations to outright extremes of dishonesty going on. This is where you want to listen on an intuitive gut level, because if somebody is trying to tell you a lie, this Mercury retrograde is going to want to expose it, because pointing to self, pointing to Aries, you can have that intuitive gut reaction in the solar plexus, which is co-ruled by Mars, of when someone is not being honest with you. Here is the U.S. Gemini rising chart that I like to use. The July 4th, 1776 at 2:13 a.m. in Philadelphia. It's the 7-degree Gemini rising chart. In EA, many of us use this chart with Pluto with the U.S. as the 9th house Pluto, basically founded on religious freedoms. Pluto Cap is the financial freedoms. There is the understanding here that many of the founding fathers were Freemasons, and they put these planets in Cancer in the 2nd house for prosperity and religious freedom reasons. They did not know the 3 outer planets existed in 1776. The Mercury retrograde here 3 times over Saturn in Libra. Are we going to be fair with others? Are we going to find new common grounds? Are we going to resort to the extremes of the Aryan polarities and, polarize with each other? The Mercury retrograde in Libra, in addition to 3 conjunctions to Saturn, Mercury has a first quarter square to Sun, to Venus, to Jupiter and to Venus. The stellium 3 times Mercury squares Venus, Jupiter, Sun here. It's going to sextile North Node, trine South Node. It's also going to have 3 trines to Uranus. So while there's a lot of communications that can be going on here, a lot of conversations that can be going on here, I still look for this potential here of polarization. Sometimes we say that we want fairness and equality for all, but we're not really that good at practicing it. We're not really that good at including everybody in the circle. Look for more polarizations of who's right, who's wrong, rather than finding win-wins that include everybody. It really seems to have a lot of polarization in this country. I don't think it's going to end until Pluto goes over Pluto in 2022-23, if I'm remembering my dates correctly. Not going to go into a lot on this, just wanted to point this out briefly for you. The Mercury opposition to Uranus. Mercury's going to have last quarter squares to Pluto, but it is not going to get far enough to oppose Uranus before its retrograde. I did want to bring this in here because Mercury leaves its post-shadow October 24th. The next day it has its opposition to Uranus. And what this allows is a potential ability to move forward with the Mercury retrograde reviews. The listening, the common ground, negotiations, compromising, being able to enter into new territories. And of course, the distortions, more polarizations, more standoffs. I thought these were kind of cute, Mercury Uranus, on an individual level. If you cannot read this, the cartoon, of course it won't let you call your ex-boyfriend. It's a smartphone. And of course, for any of you who might follow some of the Pluto Libras, Pluto Scorpios too on Facebook. Facebook should have a limit on how many times you can change your relationship status. After 3 times, it should default to unstable. Not trying to, I don't mean to offend anybody. Just a little Mercury retrograde humor going on here. One more for you that's not quite so humorous. Here's California's chart as rectified by Mark Penfield. Long time ago, he did horoscopes of the USA and Canada. It is a great resource book. Mark, M-A-R-C, Penfield, P-E-N-F-I-E-L-D. It is my go-to resource for states, provinces, cities, US, and Canada. So he has California, September 9th, 1850, 9:41 a.m., San Jose, California. And as you can see, back in 1850, we had 3 Uranus-Pluto conjunctions between 29 and 30 degrees Aries. You can see here, Uranus is retrograde. It's going to go over Pluto again in 1850 before it had a 3rd conjunction at almost 30 degrees. All 3 again. No conjunctions, Taurus. Look at Saturn, balsamic, both of these, all 3 retrograde. Here's Saturn retrograde at 1949 degrees Aries. What is traveling right now this year 3 times back and forth over 19 degrees Saturn? Here's Uranus. The California is having Uranus-Saturn conjunctions 3 times. A drought, anybody? Uranus has a tendency to dehydrate any aspect. In mundane astrology, it is bringing up the drought, literally. Drying up the land, 6th house, the bread belt of the U.S., the, what do they call it, Central Valley in California, the wells drying up. Here's the dates for the Uranus conjunctions to Saturn. June 14th, 2015, September 6th, the retrograde one. Look at the forest fire explosions we've had in the last week in California. Here's the 3rd and final conjunction, March 29th, 2016. The other thing that we see going on, though, is the Mercury retrograde in Libra is going to be 3 times over California's natal Mercury and California's natal Mars. And, you know, basically what we're working with here is California cannot have head in the sand anymore. I just recently was reading some articles in The Nation magazine about the extremes of water inequality going on in California. The extremes being used by a lot of the water-intensive farming going on, growing crops that are not native to that area. The most extreme one is all the almond orchards. They're the most water-intensive crop in California. the golf courses, the extremes of wealth in Southern California and the Bay Area, and the green lawns. And then the other part of it is a lot of all the migrant workers in the small little communities that are unincorporated, where the wells have dried up or the water is so bad you cannot bathe in it. Now, my beautiful fan, Ellen Brown from webofdebt.com, wrote an article this year about primary water sources, about deep well drilling that is pretty much untapped. That is something that you may want to research, look into. I'm not remembering the website. PrimaryWaterInstitute.org. I'm guessing, to really look at some solutions versus all of the billionaires buying up aquifers and lakes and resources all across the world. I think the statistic is somewhere like 30 to 40% of the world's population. Now, 40% of the world's population lives within 30 miles of being water challenged. That quote might be just the opposite. So you can see here from this example on a mundane or collective level that this Mercury retrograde is really raising alarms and 6/12 crises, literally, in this state. California is the richest state in the richest country in the world. And stay tuned for more on the whole drought situation. The next Mercury retrograde from one Aquarius to something Capricorn is going to square this stuff in the month of January 2016. So a lot more to address with this situation. I think you get the picture. Mercury waning Neptune. This is the waning quincunx or inconjunct. It's the 210 degree aspect. The waxing inconjunct is 150 degrees, 0 Libra inner adjustments. The waning inconjunct is 210 degrees outer adjustments, meaning our partner or society, our outer world's going to be coming at us some way, asking us to make the extra communication efforts, asking us to change our communications, listening and speaking, because Neptune is in Pisces. It's asking us to hear God, Goddess speak to us through others. I don't even know if traditional astrology puts this aspect in your little happy calendars. We are having to face our expectations that we project out there with the reality of what's going on in our outer world. We're having to release de facto God-Goddess projections onto our relationships. Now, some of the distortions, an inability or unwillingness to listen to others, and the avoiding or neglecting of communications. And to the extent that we do this, we might have confrontations come at us, forcing us into communicating with others. I thought that this little quote here was a pretty good definition. In case you can't see it, relationships are mirrors that show your true self. Accept what you see. Be open to heal through those who are in your life. It's not always easy to see the mirror of ourself in someone else. And that's what this planetary pair is asking us to do. And then honor the other Minimize the projections onto the other. What is it about myself that is coming back to me that I need to adjust, change, evolve, mature? Can I have those subtle yet important conversations? Where am I avoiding communicating with someone? And where do I need to make that extra effort? Especially as Venus and Mars move into Virgo with Jupiter and make the oppositions to Neptune and Chiron. Mercury, of course, is making those last quarter squares to Pluto 3 times. The last quarter square, 270 degrees, is the crises in consciousness aspect that Dane Rudier labeled. First became known for creating those keywords for the last quarter squares. This is emphasizing the need to listen on an inner level. Crises in consciousness. 3/4 away around the circle. We've done the manifestation. What's it all mean? It starts pointing us inward toward deeper values and ideas. Last quarter balsamic phases. So what are your evolving values and ideas around your relationships and any shared resources in relationships? Any giving and receiving of resources in relationship? There's also a need to listen outwardly. Mercury retrograde in Libra. Others are talking to us. How are they having an effect or input in our outer social world, Capricorn, in our career, Pluto in Capricorn? Where are the ultimate self-responsibilities within us? Where are our ultimate social responsibilities? This is the aspects, these aspects are what's bringing this refugee crisis to a head right now. I saw the most interesting cartoon. I should have taken a photo of it. It just popped into my head. It was a cartoon that showed the U.S. blowing up Iraq and Libya and Afghanistan and talking about the military courage in creating disaster zones, and then the political courage in taking on the responsibilities for all the refugees versus building walls and fences in both US and Europe. I think that Uranus-Pluto is a major aspect in, creating and, not creating, in reflecting the human creations of all of the dislocated peoples all over planet Earth, whether through war or climate change. And you're going to see these issues just build and build and build and build over the next 5 years as Uranus remains within the waxing square to Pluto through 1919. But here's Mercury communicating it. What is fair towards all? How do we find that common ground? Where do we have responsibilities as the richer countries bombing the rest of the world, creating the instability over there? And by the way, for those who want to blame Obama for pulling out, I think there's a little ultimate responsibility on George Bush and Dick Cheney for weapons of mass destruction that did not exist and doing their Pluto and Leo bulldozing. If I had my way, I'd ship them up, ship them out, confiscate their assets, and put that towards helping the refugees. I'll get off my political soapbox now. So you see the distortions, all these ideological differences, drawing those lines in the sand, covert, overt control games, resource upsets, and of course the refugee crises. Finally, I'd like to show you the Mercury conjunctions to the North Node and of course oppositions to the South Node, and because the nodal axis moves retrograde, this is finishing up the nodal axis transit. Did we learn anything from the South Node in Aries and the defensiveness of me versus you? Did we learn anything with the North Node in Libra and needing to learn how to play together in the sandbox we call planet Earth, finding win-win, common ground solutions for everybody? Individually, one-on-one, and of course collectively. So here's expanding the abilities to objectively listen and communicate with others, the potential to balance self with others in fair ways, letting go of defensiveness, learning new partnerships, hearing ourselves, communicating it with others. And of course the good old distortions is those extremes of polarization, self against others, us versus them, all that you see going out there. Where do you find any polarizations going on personally in your world? How are you needing to listen? How are you needing to communicate? Here's the lunar eclipse we have coming up September 27th, just before the September 30th Mercury retrograde interior conjunction with the Sun at 7 degrees. You can see that the T-square of Sun, Moon, Mercury, Uranus with Pluto in Capricorn starts to come through. And so coming off of the solar eclipse that we had about 20 degrees Virgo opposing Chiron, and this need to really be of service to helping those less fortunate. Can we do this? Or will this lunar eclipse have us degenerating into more and more polarities? You can see that the Mars, Jupiter within orb of conjunction has the oppositions going on to Neptune. So here we are, more in the news. We have started achieving more marriage equality. You see the polarization with the Christian right going on. If she cannot do her duty, she could stand down. I think she makes 80, the Kim Davis that was in the news for refusing to issue marriage license, she makes $80,000 a year in rural Kentucky. She's going to save the job. She went back to work today. She's not issuing any licenses. Let's see how the court battles play this out. Give peace a chance. The Iran nuclear agreement that many of the major parties in the European Union agreed to, but all of, the political right in the U.S., God forbid if we give peace a chance and we don't create another war. And of course, sharing borders with refugees, that just is so much in the news here. So I always like to include this t-shirt. There's the source if you want to order yourself one. Recapping Mercury retrograde in Libra. How do I quiet my mind and listen to my inner voice? Who is the real me, Aries polarity, through the changes in my world? How do I listen to others? Can I hear their truth as it exists for them? How are my relationship values evolving? How are healthy boundaries evolving for me? What are the healthiest relationship choices for me? And I might add another one. How do I best communicate with everyone in my world? All right, that is most of my material as I finish up the last of a few slides. If anybody has any questions on Mercury retrograde subjects that I may not have discussed, you're welcome to raise your hand on the board. That little hand that comes out as a question mark, you must have a USB or earbud headset so we can hear you clearly, or you can type questions into the Q&A that Leroy can ask and we can interact with for you. While I'm checking to see, here is this future Mercury retrograde webinar. It will be Monday, June 4th, 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Mercury's retrograde the 5th through the 25th from 1 Aquarius to 15 Cap. This Mercury retrograde will have 3 squares to Mars in Libra, 3 squares to Uranus in Aries, and it will conjunct Pluto 3 times. So, very active Mercury retrograde. The beginning of the calendar year. Stay tuned. We'll do another free Mercury webinar as the time arises. Leroy, questions from anybody? Here's future classes, webinars. I will be starting
You're clear on the board.
Okay, I will be starting a new chakra series, and I have set the classes for the first 2. Monday, November 16th, we'll do the root chakra and survival issues. Monday, December 14th, we'll do the sacral chakra and sexuality. 2016 forecast will be December 30th. We'll be entering a 9-year, finishing up a 9-year cycle globally. And of course, here's the free, oops, that should be the 4th. Wrong date. I'll get that changed. That should be January 4th. And finally, here are all of those Mercury retrograde aspects that I've been speaking about in chronological order if you'd like to follow them. And as you can see, we've already made it through all of these. If you want any review, here's the actual aspects while Mercury is retrograde. Again, you can see how much more active it is when you include the cycle of phases and aspects. And then here's the third passage of Mercury aspects. Post-shadow, some of them fall beyond the Mercury retrograde shadow. All right, last call. Any final questions or comments? You've all been very good to hang in there for 2 hours. Never knew Mercury was so much of a full subject, huh? All right, if it's quiet, then I'm going to wish all of you a most peaceful evening. And remember, for the next few days, you can have a one-time shopping experience, 25% off anything in your shopping cart at EAN. The coupon code upon checkout is Libra. Right, everyone, I wish you all the best in those communication skills, both listening and speaking as fairly as possible in any and all relationships. Adios.